Police storm the home of a black man. They have no idea he's a former elite military operator. What follows is a story so intense, it'll leave you stunned. Picture this. A man who once led secret missions overseas, a decorated special ops leader who faced death countless times, now living a quiet life in a peaceful suburb, far from the chaos he once commanded. He blended in, reserved, polite, always the first to clear snow from his driveway. No one in the neighborhood of Maple Ridge, Ohio, could have guessed his past. He'd survived what most couldn't imagine. But that didn't stop prejudice from kicking in. One night, local police, driven by bias and paranoia, broke through his front door without warning. They had no warrant, no cause, just assumptions. They didn't know about the man they were confronting, nor the hidden truths buried deep in his classified history. This isn't just a case of mistaken identity. This is what happens when two completely different realities clash. Meet Darren Cole. He never imagined his peaceful life in Maple Ridge would spiral into public outrage. The town was your typical Midwest spot. Fast food chains, grocery stores, neighbors who waved but never asked questions. Darren had moved there after retiring from Camp Douglas, where he served 14 years with the elite Ghost Unit, a division so secret most civilians never heard of it. Around the neighborhood, Darren was the guy with the black lab, out walking every morning at sunrise, polite, punctual, always keeping his lawn perfect. No one knew about the medals boxed away in his attic, a Valacross, a Shadow Star, commendations signed by commanders who trusted him with the impossible. Darren, tall, muscular, and in his early 40s, kept a low profile, plain t-shirts, worn jeans, and intense morning workouts in his garage. He never talked about his past, especially not about the covert missions in war zones no one dared to name. His silence wasn't just habit, it was duty. But for all the calm Maple Ridge pretended to have, there were cracks beneath the surface. Some officers in the local force had long been accused of aggressive behavior toward residents of color. Traffic stops would turn tense for no reason. Body cams often malfunctioned during critical moments. Though many wore the badge with honor, a small group operated under a different code, one of intimidation and unchecked power. Sergeant Billy Rollins was one of them. Born and raised in Maple Ridge, he thought of himself as a protector, convinced that outsiders were a threat to his town. Though he lived by order and structure, Officer Rollins had a narrow view of who belonged. And Darren? He didn't fit that mold. Because Darren kept to himself, Billy started spinning stories in his head. Maybe he was hiding weapons. Maybe he was ex-military, unhinged, paranoid. Maybe something darker was going on. There was no evidence, no record, no complaints, not even a parking fine. But Billy convinced a few others on the force that Darren Cole was hiding something dangerous. What began as suspicion was about to explode into disaster. One cold, damp evening, Billy claimed he had inside info. A tip from a known liar who had a rap sheet for fabricating stories. The claim? Darren was moving high-grade narcotics from his basement. It was flimsy, but Billy saw it as his opportunity. If Darren had drugs or weapons, Billy wanted to make the bust. He persuaded a judge, already overwhelmed with a stack of cases, to sign a no-knock warrant. He painted Darren as unstable, a threat, potentially tied to militant groups. The judge, tired and under pressure, approved the warrant without a second thought. Meanwhile, Darren was in his upstairs office, writing to an old comrade now stationed in Europe. Outside, the night was quiet. a soft rain tapping on the windows. His only worry was whether to watch an old military film or turn in early. At exactly 10:46 p.m., a battering ram shattered his front door. The crash echoed through the street. Neighbors jolted from sleep. Maple Ridge Police, search warrant. Sirens flared, lights flashed across the neighborhood. Inside, Darren's instincts exploded into action. Years of combat training took over. His heart raced, but his mind stayed clear. He knew the odds. In his own home, unarmed, wearing plain clothes, he was vulnerable. Seconds later, armed officers flooded in, weapons drawn. They expected resistance, chaos, yelling. But Darren didn't flinch. He moved fast, secured a side hallway, then dropped. To his knees, hands behind his head, no shouting, no threats, no fight. Because in the world he came from, control and discipline were survival. But when Sergeant Rollins saw Darren, his eyes filled with judgment. He barked commands, shoved Darren to the floor, and knelt hard into his back. The cuffs were snapped on, so tight they cut into his skin. Darren gritted his teeth but stayed silent. The entire block lit up with flashing lights and confusion. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some cracked open their doors. Others watched from darkened porches. Police scattered through the house, rifling through the living room, tearing apart the kitchen, even busting open a locked closet in the basement. Sergeant Rollins was on a mission, desperate to find anything that could justify the raid. "Clear," echoed from room to room, but there were no weapons, no drugs, nothing illegal, only framed. Photos of Darren in uniform, old medals. A home so clean and orderly, it told the story of a man who lived with pride and discipline. Still, Rollins wouldn't stop. He barked an order to search the attic. He yanked open a weathered trunk, hoping to uncover something damning. What he found instead, camo uniforms folded with care, a pair of worn jump wings, a beret with a subtle crest, an American flag, folded to perfection. Then, a citation. He held it in his hand. A commendation for the valor emblem. He started reading. For exceptional courage in the face of armed threat. Cole's decisive actions led to the survival of fellow unit members. Another document detailed a classified mission, a hostage rescue overseas. 12 lives saved. Darren had led the entire operation. Several younger officers froze. They recognized the insignia. The crest of one of the world's most elite units. A silence fell. They knew. If Darren had wanted to resist, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Special forces like his, trained in counterterrorism, reconnaissance, high-risk assault. One rookie officer, barely holding back a tremor, looked at Billy and whispered, "Sir, this guy's a war hero." Meanwhile, Darren still lay face down, wrists swollen, flesh red from the cuffs. The house was wrecked. The air was thick with unease. Finally, a higher-ranking officer stepped forward and unfastened the restraints. The front door lay shattered on the floor. Books and furniture were scattered across the room. A few cops looked away in shame. But Rollins kept his expression cold. He cleared his throat, muttered that they'd followed a tip. Darren didn't yell. In a quiet, composed tone, the kind forged in battlefields, he asked, "May I see the warrant?" His calm hit harder than any anger could. Billy fumbled through his notes, reading the no-knock order aloud. But Darren immediately pointed out the flaws, inconsistencies, missing details. no valid probable cause. Though rage simmered beneath the surface, Darren didn't lose control. "I'm asking you to leave," he said, firm, unshaken. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, then looked at their lieutenant. Rollins stood frozen, his pride bruised and cracking. He'd gone too far to admit failure now. "We're not finished," he barked. "We need to do a deeper sweep." "That's enough." The words came from Sergeant Naomi Bennett, a senior officer whose discomfort had grown with every step of the operation. She glanced between Billy and Darren, then said firmly, "There's nothing here. We've got no grounds to—" "Hold, Mr. Cole." Rollins didn't move. His eyes drifted back to the open trunk, the medals, the citations scattered across the floor. Every piece of Darren's past screamed a truth Billy refused to hear. They had stormed the home of a decorated veteran on baseless suspicions. Outside, more neighbors had gathered, phones out. Recording everything, tensions were rising by the second. Billy ignored Sergeant Bennett. He marched up to Darren, his expression twisted in frustration. "We have a right to be here," he snapped. "If you got nothing to hide, you'll—" "Let us finish." Darren stood slowly, calm, commanding. Shoulders squared, he looked down at Rollins, a full head taller, and said in a clear, firm voice, "Sergeant Bennett, I respectfully ask that you remove your officers from my home." Without hesitation, she nodded. "Team, wrap it up. We're leaving." Billy's jaw clenched. But he had lost the room. One by one, the officers stepped around the broken front door and walked out. The flashing lights outside began to dim. The silence that followed was louder than any siren. But just before he stepped off the porch, Billy turned back and muttered to Darren, "This isn't over." The next morning, the town of Maple Ridge woke to viral chaos. Videos shot by neighbors spread online. Clips of the raid, the trashed home, the rough handling. Outrage poured in. Some called it police overreach. Others demanded justice for Darren. A few still defended the officers. News vans arrived. Reporters knocked. Darren, calm as ever, declined every interview. He just wanted to fix his front door. But he couldn't repair the piece that had been torn apart. As he waited for the contractor, he found himself staring at the wreckage and remembering the grueling drills back at Camp Douglas, the endless hours on shooting ranges, practicing breaching techniques eerily similar to what had just been used against him. He thought about desert nights tracking targets in enemy territory, operating in complete silence, and now, back home. This was the thanks he got. It hit him harder than he expected. "I never imagined I'd face this kind of threat, from the very people I once swore to protect. And that break-in unlocked something else. Old memories. A youth spent dodging street violence, enduring routine stops, being judged before being seen. He'd grown up in the heart of East Haven, a tough district on the edge of Cleveland, where police sirens usually signaled trouble, not safety. It was the military that gave Darren purpose, a way to channel his rage, sharpen his focus, and build a life rooted in honor. But now, years later, with a baseless warrant used to raid his home, he had come full circle. A man who risked everything for his country, now treated like a suspect in his own living room. Within days, the Maple Ridge Police Department was under heavy scrutiny. The regional sheriff launched an internal review into what happened that night. The town's mayor, caught off guard, expressed public concern about the reckless use of the no-knock warrant. Sergeant Rollins? He refused to back down. Claimed again that his source was credible, even as his colleagues started backing away from the unfolding scandal. Support for Darren poured in from across the country. Veteran groups rallied behind him. Old teammates from Ghost Unit reached out, furious and frustrated. A connection inside federal circles told Darren the Justice Department was quietly taking interest. No-knock warrants were already under fire. But a case like this, targeting a black decorated veteran with no criminal record, sparked concern far beyond the town limits. Despite the growing media frenzy, Darren chose to stay silent. He told those close to him, "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want what's right." Behind the scenes, he struggled with how to respond. Suing the city was an option. A clear civil rights case with lawyers ready to act. But Darren preferred honesty over litigation. He believed in direct, clear conversations. So one afternoon, he picked up the phone and asked for a private meeting with Police Chief Ronald Grant. Grant, a veteran officer nearing retirement, agreed without hesitation. They met in a modest conference room at the department HQ. The air was heavy with tension. Darren sat across from the chief. Grant rubbed his forehead, weary. "Mr. Cole," he began, "let me start by saying I'm deeply sorry. What happened shouldn't have happened. This department is supposed to stand for fairness, and that night, we failed." Darren gave a firm nod, his voice steady. "It wasn't just a mistake, Chief," he said. "There was an effort to make me look like a criminal, with no facts, no grounds. That's not just carelessness, that's targeted." Chief Grant exhaled slowly. He admitted it. Some officers, especially Rollins, had developed a pattern, a culture of bending the rules. "We tried to rein him in," he said. "But internal discipline moves slow. Still, no excuses. I know there's a deeper issue at play. My focus now is on fixing what's been broken." Darren leaned forward, voice calm but sharp. "My parents raised me to never paint all cops with the same brush. But this needs accountability. Real accountability. Are you willing to make that happen?" The chief met his gaze somber. "We've launched a full investigation," he said, "and Sergeant Rollins's job is Darren studied the chief's expression. He saw sincerity, but also the hesitation of someone bound by system and protocol. He rose from his chair. "Then I'll do my part," he said. "I'll stay cooperative, but only if you commit to real reform, training, oversight, whatever it takes to make sure this never happens to someone else." Chief Grant met his eyes. "You have my word," he replied. "But be ready. Rollins won't step down without a fight." And he didn't. With a lawyer beside him, Rollins claimed Darren's military background had made him feel threatened. He argued that Darren's elite training made him a potential danger, a justification for the no-knock warrant. The media jumped on the drama. Was Darren Cole such a trained weapon that police were right to break down his door? Talk shows debated it. Some spun the story into fear. Others questioned the system itself. Local activists were blunt. If this man had been white, they asked, would this raid have even happened? Then something unexpected shifted the tone. Master Sergeant Elena Ross, an old friend from Darren's Ghost Unit days, stood up at a public forum, in full uniform. She took the mic with quiet force. She spoke of Darren's bravery, how he led rescue ops, risked his life, and never broke the rules. Even when bullets were flying, her voice cracked, but her words struck deep. He gave everything to defend this nation, and now he gets treated like a criminal in his own home. This isn't just about Darren Cole. It's about every veteran who trusts their country to treat them with dignity when they come home. The crowd erupted. The video, of her speech went viral. In the back of the room, Rollins sat stiff, his face pale. This was no longer an internal incident. It was a public reckoning. As investigators dug deeper, they found a pattern. Rollins had used the same informant in 3 other raids, all of them flawed. One case had ended in a quiet settlement. Another had led to injuries. Now the district attorney's office was weighing criminal charges, accusing Rollins of falsifying evidence to obtain the no-knock order. Then the final blow hit. A local news station aired an interview with the informant himself. He confessed. Rollins had coerced him into making false claims about Darren. He told me to say I saw guns, drugs. Whatever it took, the man whispered, voice shaking. I didn't want to lie, but I was scared. The story was everywhere. The town was at the center of a national scandal. And Darren? He remained composed, no gloating, no shouting. Still the same quiet force, a man forged in discipline. One evening, after another damning news segment, he leashed his dog and stepped into the crisp air. As he rounded a familiar corner, he breathed deep. For the first time in weeks, a dark SUV pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Billy Rollins, no uniform, just street clothes and fury in his eyes. Darren's dog let out a low growl, sensing the rising tension. Rollins marched closer. So now you're a saint, huh? He snapped. War hero, all those medals. You've turned the whole town against me. Darren didn't move. One hand on the leash, the other steady by his side. This was never about me, he replied calmly. You crossed a line. People finally see that. Rollins's face contorted. You're the real threat. You soldiers, you come back broken, ready to snap. Darren inhaled. His training reminded him, stay centered, stay composed. His voice was deep, even. I've seen men like you before, those who believe force solves everything. I just never imagined I'd see that mindset walking the streets of my own country. You're out here, in the dark, trying to intimidate me. Rollins stepped in close, eyes burning. You'd better watch your back, he hissed, then spat on the sidewalk and stormed back to his SUV. Darren exhaled slowly, heart thudding in his chest. That old tension, the urge to react, pushed up inside him. But he didn't give in. He just kept walking, dog at his side, eyes sharp, as Rollins disappeared into the night. Word of the confrontation spread fast. A witness had seen everything from a nearby porch, and soon public pressure hit a breaking point. The internal investigation concluded Sergeant Billy Rollins had abused his authority. Facing mounting outrage, Chief Grant took action. He announced, Rollins was placed on administrative leave, pending a criminal investigation. For the town, this was a turning point, proof that the department was no longer shielding bad actors. For Darren, the next decision was personal. National networks called. Interview requests flooded in. But he didn't want fame. He wanted change. So he chose one interview, just one, with a local station that had reported the facts fairly from the start. Wearing a plain shirt, sitting across from the camera, Darren told his story. He spoke about growing up in East Haven, joining the Army, earning his place in special operations, and coming home, only to find the country he defended watching him with suspicion. Not every officer is like Rollins, he said, voice calm. But it only takes one to destroy trust across a whole community. I respect those who serve, with integrity, but what happened to me? It's a wake-up call. We need accountability, or we risk tearing ourselves apart from the inside. They say karma always catches up, and it did. Rollins's past unraveled fast. New reports surfaced. Years earlier, he'd targeted a young Latino man in a nearly identical raid. Another bogus tip, another life disrupted. Documents uncovered more about Rollins's past. Turns out, his aggressive actions in previous cases had already caused irreversible damage. In one raid, a young man had died, a death many believed could have been avoided. As more details surfaced, Rollins' public image collapsed. People who once praised him as a no-nonsense officer began distancing themselves. Patterns of reckless behavior were impossible to ignore. Leaked memos showed that department leadership had been warned about him before, but never acted decisively. Now, Rollins tried to spin it all. He claimed he was a scapegoat, a victim of politics. But the evidence was undeniable. The district attorney filed charges, falsifying records, professional misconduct, and violating civil rights. Darren felt a wave of mixed emotions, relief, because justice finally was being served, but also sorrow, because it had taken a public disaster to bring just one man to account. He knew many others had been silenced, overlooked, because they didn't wear medals or have a platform to speak from. Under public pressure, the mayor of Maple Ridge stood before reporters, Chief Grant by his side. They issued a formal apology. "We recognize Mr. Cole's exemplary service, and we deeply regret the wrongful events that took place," the mayor said. Cameras flashed. The crowd was filled with veterans, neighbors, and local organizers. Chief Grant stepped up next. He laid out new policies, mandatory de-escalation training, stricter checks on informant credibility, and a full review of no-knock warrant procedures. The City Council pledged new legislation to limit the use of such tactics going forward. Then, Darren was invited to speak. He approached the microphone, paused, and spoke with clarity. "I remember my first deployment overseas. I prayed I'd return to a country that honored its own ideals. What happened to me? That was a step backward. But your voices, your support, have moved us forward. I accept this apology, but only if real change follows." Applause erupted. His words echoed far beyond the town square. News outlets carried the story across the state. For the first time in a long while, there was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment something shifted. Though the immediate storm began to calm, Darren still had repairs to make. Door to replace, walls to repaint, furniture to fix. The city covered the damage costs, but Darren's focus had turned elsewhere. He wanted to help rebuild trust, to make sure that what happened to him would never happen in silence to someone else. Darren joined a local advisory board formed to build trust between law enforcement and the community. He brought something rare to the table, a man who had used force in combat, but who deeply understood how dangerous it could be when misused. Over. The following month, he sat through town halls, listened to angry, hurt residents, and guided officers toward smarter training practices. New police cadets were required to attend seminars where Darren shared field experiences, real-life missions from his days in special ops. He emphasized one lesson again and again: discipline, respect, and knowing when not to act is just as important as knowing how. Meanwhile, Billy Rollins was still awaiting trial, but his support base had crumbled. Even the police union distanced itself, eager to avoid the fallout from his actions. The DA's office was working on a solid case, determined to make an example of the damage one officer's abuse of power could cause. For Darren, it felt like long-awaited justice. That spring, on a calm afternoon, he showed up at a charity event at the Maple Ridge Community Center, a food drive for homeless veterans. In jeans and a hoodie, he greeted volunteers quietly, sharing kind words without fanfare. A teenager approached, shy, nervous. "I saw you on the news," he said. "I used to be scared of the cops here, but after what you did, it made me think things could change. I want to join the army someday." Darren's eyes softened. He rested a hand on the kid's shoulder. "Change starts when we stand up for what's right," he said. "And if you do serve, remember your mission is to protect everyone. Never lose sight of that. That's how we rebuild trust." In that moment, Darren felt something shift inside. He'd fought overseas, and now he'd fought a different battle, one for justice, on his own soil. At Rollins' trial, the final chapter came to light. Texts were revealed in which Rollins bragged about being a kingmaker. He had openly manipulated reports, twisting facts to suit his bias. The defense claimed he was burned out, lacking proper supervision, but the jury saw through it. In less than a day, they found him guilty of misconduct and violating civil rights. Sentencing would come later. But the verdict alone sent a clear message. Justice had spoken. The town of Maple Ridge exhaled. And Darren? He sat quietly in the courtroom, no smug grin, no look of revenge. He simply bowed his head and offered a silent prayer. Not just for himself, but for every family Rollins had hurt, including his own. He stood in quiet reflection, considering the deep irony. A man trained for the most dangerous missions on earth, ambushed in his own home by an officer who had no idea who he was dealing with. When the judge struck the gavel and the verdict was finalized, Darren allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Because this wasn't just about punishing one man. It was about showing a town, and maybe a nation, what real accountability looks like. Months after the trial, Darren's home was fully restored. The new front door, stronger than ever. Neighbors now greeted him with warmth. Some brought home-cooked meals as small gestures of appreciation for his strength and voice. The police department carried on, under new leadership and a serious commitment to change. Sergeant Naomi Bennett was promoted, now overseeing reforms and public outreach. She regularly consulted Darren, knowing his insight was essential in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. In moments of reflection, Darren often remembered something Master Sergeant Eleanor Ross once told him. Home is another kind of battlefield, but it doesn't have to be a war zone if we all do our part. For Darren, those words rang more true than ever. The time for illusions was over. Change was never easy, but it was possible. Through dialogue, transparency, and courage. He also rediscovered an old passion, writing. He began submitting op-eds to the local newspaper, sharing personal stories to advocate for better policing and stronger community bonds. Readers responded with gratitude. His words brought unity instead of division, and life, slowly, found rhythm again. He still walked his dog at 6 a.m., still worked out in his garage every morning, but something had changed. Now Darren Cole had become a symbol of hope, proof that, even in the darkest moments, transformation is possible. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey. We've seen what courage looks like. We've seen how injustice takes its toll. And we've witnessed what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. Darren's story reminds us, one person, armed with conviction and dignity, can truly make a difference. By standing up to what was wrong, he not only cleared his own name but pushed an entire community to face the truth and begin again. If Darren's journey moved you, if it made you think differently about justice, heroes, and the system, show your support. Like this. Video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real stories that speak to the strength of the human spirit. Every click, every share, every subscription